All right, so we are going to join the first round of the draft between Matt D'Antuono, who is on Bravo, and he's going to be playing against Jason Kuzman, who is also on Bravo. So if you recall back to the draft, Bravo seemed to be a hero that was getting cut at the table, and it turns out there happened to be two other players aside from Matt on Bravo. So there are three Bravos that were at the draft pod. So not terribly unlikely that we see a Bravo mirror at some point here. So Matt laying out his equipment, it appears he has if we recall from our draft, the helm, the chest piece, and the Goliath gauntlets. Jason only has the Goliath gauntlets. We'll see if that equipment comes to matter in this matchup. So each player is going to be drawing up to 4. And we're going to see who's going to start it off here. As a note, one of the videos in this series of drafts actually did corrupt, so we're going to see the first round and the third round of this draft with Matt. We're going to be missing the middle round where he played Wilson Badillo, who was on Ninja. So Jason's going to pitch a emerging power to swing with Amethyst. So not really an exciting turn 1, but definitely going to give Matt a chance to kind of filter some of the cards out of his hand that he may not want. We'll see if Jason has any tricks in his hand to push that pummel, or to push that Anthos through with a pummel, for example. And he does. He has the yellow pummel. So that's going to be giving the Anthos a +3 buff. So it's coming in for 4 plus the pummel. So that's going to be a total of 5 that Matt's going to take off in turn 1. So imagine that's not exactly what Matt wanted to see. Hard to say what cards he has in his hand, but generally on turn 1, any kind of damage like that is damage you don't typically want to let through, considering you're going to be drawing up at the end of your turn. So turns over to Matt. As we saw from Matt's draft deck, he has a very powerful draft deck and has a lot of life gain throughout. So he may not be as upset about taking that 5 damage if the cards he has in his hand really help him preserve that life total throughout the course of the match. So I'm going to pitch a Wounding Blow and a Debilitate. Jason has to think a little bit about this. Wounding Bull and Debilitate are both 3 costs, so Anthos will be coming in for 6. And with this, Matt has 2 resources floated, so Jason might be thinking about a pummel in the back of his mind, which would push that Anthos attack from anywhere from +3 to +5. So, I'm sorry, +2 to +4. So Jason, definitely considering his options, is going to decide whether or not he wants to throw some cards in, or if he has a D-react he could possibly pay. And what Matt did is definitely worth noting. He initially pitched the Wounding Bull first and then the Debilitate. That allows him to be able to pitch an extra card to play the Anthos. So that overpitch in respect to Matt allows him to push that extra 3 damage through. A lot of times you see play lines like that come out more often than in Constructed. In Constructed, for example, the Bravo player would more than likely have the tectonic plating, which would allow him to similarly do the same thing. Pitch a 3-cost card that costs 3, or pitch a blue that costs 3, make a Seismic Surge token, and then pitch that blue or that other 3-cost card to be able to come in with an Anthos for 6. So in draft, you have to be a little bit less efficient and underpitch a card, but Matt definitely understands how that gameplay line works and was able to do so. So push Anthos through for 6, and it turns over to Jason. One of the things to consider when we see playline or heroes that are overdrafted at table is sometimes they're going to be cards making an appearance in the deck that otherwise may not be normal cards you would see in a draft deck where it's done under not overdrafted. So, example, you might see a lot more Crippling Crushes, for example, than you otherwise would see from both heroes. I'm sorry, not Crippling Crush, Cartilage Crush. So Jason does a similar play line by activating Bravo for the Dominate. Matt does have the defense reaction in order to block that full attack. So Jason threw a Bravo dominated attack, but only essentially cost him a card. So he traded a card for card with Matt In these Bravo games, typically the drafts can go a little bit longer. So to the extent that Matt was able to only use a card to block that attack, and Jason, that essentially get through all of his resources in that attack. Matt definitely is in a pretty strong position after that turn. And here we see Matt again doing the over pitch Anathos swing with 2 floating. Some of this might be because Matt is in a situation where because of the amount of Bravo players at table, he was forced to take more yellows than I'm sure he probably otherwise wanted to. So we might see a similar play line from this by Matt throughout the draft, where he has to pitch a yellow, then a pitch a blue, in order to keep that Anthos for 6, and also to be able to have the right amount of resource to pay for the attack. So Anthos coming in for 6. Jason is going to go ahead and block 3. So that takes Jason down to 14. Matt is at 15. And Matt is going to throw those cards at the bottom of the deck and draw up the 4. There we see Jason throwing a buckling blow in front of that. Again, not a card you're super happy to run in a Bravo draft, but definitely it's a good card. It's a blue. It fills in some of your curve, and it's a 4 pitch or 4 calls attack, which helps for Anathos. But generally, not super excited to see those kind of cards. And Jason coming with a Bravo dominate and a wounding bull for 7, so it's gonna be 7 dominated, and it's gonna get that +1 buff because he's a 14. So you can make a reasonable argument that Jason may have taken that damage the last turn just in order to get the extra 1 damage through for wounding bull. So an 8 dominated attack from a generic is pretty solid. Pretty solid combination of cards from Jason there. And Matt blocks 3, so he blocks with a card and a piece of equipment, and he ends up taking 4 off of that. So that was a good play line by Jason, really showing the power of Bravo's on demand dominate ability by being able to push that 8 dominated attack through. All right, Matt again doing the over pitch for Anathos. So this one is going to be coming in again for, I believe, for another 6. So with Matt's deck, he's happy to have these kind of turns where he can just push 6 damage pretty consistently. Matt does have a lot of life gain from the Tome of Fyendal, the Sigil of Solace, and the Blessing of Deliverance that he picked up in the draft. So if he's able to keep pressure up on his opponent, keep pushing that 6, he can very much play for an end game where he's setting up the last-ditch efforts at the bottom of his deck. He is gaining life over the course of the turn, or over the course of the game. So Matt is very happy to keep coming with these 6 attack Anathos swings, getting cards out of Jason's hand, and really forcing Jason to have to respond to what he's doing. So Jason throws a 3 block in front of Anathos. Matt's checking his hand. He does have the 2 resources floating, so there's a chance that Matt could be throwing a pummel there from Jason's perspective, but happy just to take that damage, and Matt's going to throw 2 cards at the bottom of his deck and draw up the 4, and the life totals are 11 each. Matt does take that sigil, one of the sigils we talked about, or one of the means of life gains that we talked about in Matt's deck. So nice end of turn sigil in order to get that extra card up. Was able to bluff Jason a little bit to make him think about a possible pummel there. So we see Jason firing off a red Cartilage Crush. No dominate. So Matt has to be considering that there might be a pummel in Jason's hand in order to try to, force through that extra damage with the crush effect and possibly to get him to discard a card. Matt's looking at, you can see a Crippling Crush in Matt's hand, so he definitely wants to probably play a little bit conservative what he has going on in hand right now. Don't know if it's necessarily worth throwing a lot of cards in front of it to prevent a pummel attack, but definitely could be something in Matt's decision-making process as he moves to blocks here. Matt does have the Iron Rot Plate left. That would allow him to throw a card and a piece of and that Iron Rod Plate in front to avoid the crush effect. But he goes ahead and he blocks with 2 cards. So he's blocking for 6 on a 7 attack. So he would be taking 1 damage here. Jason deciding if he wants to do anything in response to that on his turn. And he does have the pummel. So he goes ahead and throws a blue pummel, which is going to buff that by 2. So Jason's going to be coming over the top for 3. And that's kind of the worst case scenario for Matt there, that he blocks with 2 cards and still has to discard a card from pummel. So Definitely gonna hold on to that crippling crush to get rid of the disable that he had in hand. So not really much for Matt to do here. He is in a position that this would be an opportune time to pop the helm. He's already has battle worn on it. The Anathos is red pitch, so he'd really would have to set him up. So yeah, that's what he goes ahead and does. He pops the helm, get that extra intellect from Bravo, and also worth noting he's putting that crippling crush to the bottom of his deck, where as the late game goes on, if he has the opportunity to cycle through his deck again, that crippling crush is going to be very relevant toward the end of the game. And also, that also allows Matt to have a little bit of setup on his deck to be able to throw some blues in addition to what he has. Blues in addition to that crippling crush on the bottom of his deck in order to get the resources to pay for it. So as you can see, Matt has a 5-card hand off of the helm. Jason is a 4-card hand. Both players are at 11 life. Matt with a 5-card hand plus an arsenal has got to be pretty scary for Jason to be looking down at. So I imagine Jason's going to try to do whatever he can to try to get some cards out of his Matt's hand. So, but he does actually the opposite. He decides that he is going to ignore those cards in Matt's hand. He's going to go with a demolition crew, and he's going to show 2 or greater. So, power of demolition crew is that if you reveal calls with 2 or greater, demolition crew has dominate. So he's gonna have a five dominate with that, and he's going to pummel it also. So again, back-to-back pummel turns for Jason. As you got to imagine, as Matt, he is not super excited to see that. So that's 5, and that looks like a red pummel. So that's going to be becoming a demolition crew for a total of 9. But Matt does have the unmovable from hand, so that is going to full block that. That is going to be the 3 from the card plus the 6 from the unmovable. So again, Jason wasting a pummel there, thinking he had Matt in a tough spot, but Matt was able to respond back with a solid unmovable drawn at a pretty opportune time. Definitely interested to see what that card is in Matt's arsenal. It's been sitting there for a few turns. I don't know if it's a card he's waiting to set up there, or a card just kind of gotten stuck in there because of the way these turns have played out, with Jason keeping the pressure up with the pummels on back-to-back turns. So Matt goes from a 5-card hand down to a 2-card hand with card and arsenal. So Bravo being able to play off 2-card hands, there's still definitely something that Matt can do in his situation. Have to imagine it's going to be an Anathos attack for 6 if he has the ability to either underpitch it, or if he has a card in his arsenal that he could use to do that. Alright, so he does pop that arsenal card, which is Tome of Findall, which is a great card in arsenal. He's going to pitch. He's going to draw 2 cards off of that, and it's going to gain him 3 life. So again, the power of Matt's deck life gain coming up again. 3 off the sigil, 3 off the Tome of Findall. So Matt already effectively gaining 6 lives over the course of this game, and he still has some more life gain in the deck that Jason may or may not know about. So Matt's going to throw a card in arsenal here. He's going to happily gain that life and draw up. So it's pretty safe to say that Matt is probably feeling like he's gotten through a lot of the hard turns from Jason's deck. The back-to-back pummel turns is definitely something that it's enough to knock a player off tempo, but in order for Matt to be able to weather those turns without really any major damage, and also being able to even gain life and be ahead on life at this point in the game, is very solid as he continues to bleed those expensive attack reacts out of Jason's deck. So Jason still has a 4-card hand. It's hard to imagine he's going to be able to do too much this turn, but he's going to pitch, and he's going to Bravo dominate. We're going to see if he's going to do that just to be able to swing the Anathos for 6, or if he's going to be coming in. Nope. So it looks like that is a red debilitate. So that red debilitate is going to be coming in for 8. If it does 4 or more damage, then the first attack gets a -2 attack for the next turn. So not necessarily the most impressive crush effect, but the fact is it still is an 8 attack with dominate, so that is something that Matt has to definitely consider. So he's throwing the emerging power in front of it, which is going to take that down to a 5. Matt probably doesn't necessarily care about the minus attack at this point, so he's going to take that 5 damage, and he's going to be under the crush effect for next turn. So Matt does have that 3-card hand. And it's worth noting, some cards read attack or attack action cards. The crush effect is an attack, so even the Anathos attack would come under that crush effect also. Some of the templating on cards specifically says attacks debilitates that attack, so that is something that is worth noting. So Matt's going to pop those Goliath gauntlets, which are more or less going to be zeroed out from the crush effect. So he's going to go with the yellow Slogism and a blue Raging Onslaught. So the yellow Slogism is going to be adding +5 to the attack, and the blue Raging Onslaught, I believe, is a 5. So he's going to be going going to be coming in for 10. Not dominated, but I imagine at this point Matt is actually just happy to get cards out of Jason's hand, even if Jason throws a few cards, 2 to 3 cards in front of it, or has a defense reaction. At this point, Matt is still going to probably punch through some damage, and he's going to try to get a little bit of tempo back on his side. Considering Matt just got crushed with a dominated Bravo attack, to be able to have the ability to fire back with this series of cards is definitely very strong. So Jason elects not to block and moves right to defense reaction. He goes with a Sink Below. So he's going to decide whether or not to resolve his Sink trigger there. So that is going to be a 10 attack. It's going to be blocked for 4. So Jason will be taking 6 off this attack. And it looks like he elects not to use the Sink trigger. So that was a good rebuttal from Matt in order to deal with that crush turn from Jason. So Matt's going to be drawing up 4 cards. Note, he does not have an arsenal. Jason does have 3 cards in an arsenal. So both players effectively playing with 4 cards at the moment. So Jason firing off a Crush Confidence, red. This crush effect is the hero loses all abilities. So definitely relevant at this later stage in the game with Bravo not being able to give on-demand dominate. So this Crush Confidence is coming in for 7. Jason is at 9. He does have to be concerned about a pummel. That would be a pretty awful way to lose the game. Getting pummeled by under defending the attack. So it looks like Jason's going to block with 2 cards here. Definitely thinking about it. Notice that he has a Blessing and Deliverance in hand, yellow. That is another one of his life gain outlets for him there. Blessing and Deliverance has the ability to gain 2 life. But it looks like he's more concerned with getting that 3 block in front of the Crush Confidence at the moment. So Matt is going to be blocking. Yep, and that shows it was an excellent play by Matt. So Matt blocked 6 there, so he's going to take 1 damage anyway, and that blue pummel is going to come over and push 2 extra damage, but it does not prevent the crush effect. It doesn't necessarily matter. It's not like Matt is going to be able to really do too much with 1 less card in his hand, but definitely saves it away. That Jason would have, if Matt would have elected not to block, that would have been lethal on board. So in this respect, Matt is able to get the card out of Jason's arsenal. Have to take a turn off to do it, though. So he does have a card. He's going to be able to put that in arsenal. And then he's going to be able to move to his next turn. Oh, okay. So he elects to swing with the Anathos for 4. Definitely could go either way with I guess the Last Ditch Effort isn't really a card you want in arsenal. So I could definitely see why Matt decided to elect to swing with the Anathos instead. And even though this was Anathos isn't getting his plus, at this point in the game with Jason on 5 life, the Anathos coming in for 4, it's likely to bleed 1. It's likely to punch through 1 life from Jason. And Matt would be incredibly happy if Jason elects not to block and takes all 4 damage in order to try to push back a bigger turn. Kind of see Jason's hand a little bit. It looks like he does have a pretty high density of 2 blocks in his hand. So that is an awkward situation for him to be in. Lucky for Jason, he does have perfect information. He knows that Matt has no resources floating, no card in arsenal, so he doesn't have to worry about a pummel or another kind of reaction card in order to that could sneak up on him there. So Jason's trying to figure out if he wants to block with one of the 3s that he has in hand or block with a 2. So he decides to block with a 2. Scour the battlefield at this point in the game. I agree with that block. I don't think that's necessarily doing too much for Jason right now. He could definitely have a turn where he could set it up in Arsenal. It's going to be interesting to see how he plays out this next turn. Looks like he has a Sink Below in hand also, so he might be wanting to put that Sink Below in Arsenal. Oftentimes with the Bravo mirror, you want to be able to try to get more than one attack in per turn. So interesting to see him throw away that Scour the Battlescape and throw that card away. That might have been one of those cards worth setting up in Arsenal to be able to try to get a multi-attack turn with Bravo. So Jason elects to pop the Goliath Gauntlets here. He's going to give us +2 attack to another Debilitate. So this Debilitate is going to be coming in for 8. Again, similar to Matt, Jason's kind of showed his whole hand here, so Matt knows he doesn't have to really play around the pummel. Knows it's coming in for 8, so it's definitely coming in for more than lethal. Matt does have plenty of cards in hand, and he has a piece of equipment to block, so definitely likely Matt will be able to defend this. And you have to imagine at this point he's trying to sculpt his next turn in order to ensure he can return with a Bravo dominated attack in order to try to really make Jason have that defense reaction in hand. And again, for Matt, seeing that Sink Below pitched by Jason is also pretty reassuring to know that there's not a defense reaction that could be waiting to deal with that dominated attack. It's definitely an interesting play line. Jason had a couple interesting decisions at that point. He could have taken that Scour the Battlescape and put it in Arsenal in order to try to push through damage on his next turn and just swung with an Anathos. But also he could have put that Sink Below in Arsenal expecting Matt to try to be able to do a dominated turn. I believe that's a blue Sink Below, so it wouldn't have really done necessarily too much for Jason in Arsenal, but it would have been another possibility in order to avoid an attack. So a crushed attack or dominated attack. So the Sink Below is coming in for. Sink Below will be blocking for 2 plus a card in hand. We imagine would be a 3, so he'd be able to block 5 of an attack. And with him being at 3 life, that effectively allows him to be able to take 7 damage from a crushed attack or from a dominated attack. So interesting play line. I'm sure that there's definitely some thought patterns that go into that and try to figure out why he elected to do that. But I definitely could see both sides of that. They're definitely interesting decision point in the game for sure. So with that turn, both players are at 3 life. Matt was able to block. He does have 2 cards in hand. Now, similarly to Jason, Matt has to be concerned about if he's not able to push back a lot of damage, allowing Jason to set up that dominated attack. So Matt's going to underpitch he's going to overpitch in order to swing the Anathos for 6. So at this point in the game, with Jason on 3 life, that Anathos coming in for a 6 is pretty frustrating. And worth noting, this is one of the situations that by Jason not having that equipment piece, in order to be able to rely on at this point in the game, he's going to have to defend with 2 cards in hand, where otherwise he might have been able to get away with just defending with 1 card in hand. So by Matt having that helm and that chess piece over the course of the game, in addition to the life gain he had, he definitely shows the ability to rely on the equipment slots to be able to save a full card at later points in the game or at pivotal turn points in the game. So Jason's going to block with 1 card. And he's going to pass reactions. He's going to go with another Sink Below that he was able to have. So he's going to block out 5 of that. He's going to elect not to sink a card from hand. So Matt is able to get 2 cards out of Jason's hand and push through 1 life. So that's a pretty nice turn for Matt. Doesn't necessarily have to be concerned with too much from Jason here. Probably expecting an Anathos swing. So it's going to be Anathos coming in for 4. Jason does have a card in hand, so unlikely to be able to do anything with that card. So Matt's probably just has to be concerned about an attack for 4. And he's definitely thinking over the numbers of it now. So I'm going to throw 1 card in front of that, and it's going to block 3. So Matt's also going to take 1. So they're going to go down to 2. But again, the difference between that turn is that Jason was able to get 1 card out of Matt's hand, where Matt was able to get 2 cards out of his hand. So that's definitely one of the situations that it kind of comes back to show the ability of making sure you can kind of sculpt turns. So Matt coming with the final dominated debilitate in order to push through that last couple points of damage.